So, this is the story I never thought I'd write. I used to read those crazy Reddit threads at 2 a.m., wine in one hand, thinking damn, these people need therapy. Turns out, karma was just biding its time with me. Let me rewind. I'm 33, married to my husband, Mark, 35, for the past 8 years. We met in college. He was charming, funny, the kind of guy who could sell ice to an Eskimo. I was the more grounded one, the planner, as my friends would joke. I liked spreadsheets and meal prep. He liked surprises and figuring it out. When we moved in together after college, we made a deal. I'd manage the day-to-day stuff, bills, groceries, appointments, and he'd handle long-term finances. Investments, taxes, savings. I've got a head for money, he said with a grin. And I, stupidly in love, believed him. Things were good, for a while. Fast forward to 2 months ago. It was a Tuesday, one of those dumb, boring nights where I was making pasta and half listening to a podcast. Mark was out late for work again. Lately, that had been happening more often, but he always had a good excuse. Meetings. Client dinners. Traffic. I was draining the spaghetti when I realized I'd burned the sauce. Annoyed, I turned off the stove and flopped onto the couch, waiting for him. Absent-mindedly, I grabbed a pile of mail I hadn't gone through and started flipping through it. Junk, credit card offer, and then a bank statement. Odd. I never get bank statements. Everything's online now. But the envelope was addressed to me. I opened it. My stomach flipped. The account had $742 in it. That might not seem shocking, but we both made decent money. Not rich, but comfortable. I worked in HR, Mark was in sales. We didn't live lavishly, but we weren't scraping either. And this account, it was under both our names. And here's the thing, I didn't even know this account existed. At first, I told myself it was probably just an old savings account, something we forgot about. But the transactions were recent. Like, last week recent. Gas, lunch, a $300 charge to some golf place Mark had mentioned casually a few days back. I remember staring at that statement for a good 5 minutes, like it would rearrange itself into something normal if I blinked enough. That night, when Mark came home, I didn't confront him right away. I just observed. He kissed me on the forehead like usual, dropped his bag by the door, and went straight to the shower. I sat there on the bed, holding the statement behind my back like it was contraband. When he came out, towel around his waist, I asked, casually, "Hey, how's the new client going?" He didn't miss a beat. "Oh, rough. Meeting ran late. Might have to take them out again Thursday." I nodded. I didn't mention the bank statement. Instead, I waited. And over the next few days, I dug. Not just a little, deep. I pulled up old emails, checked the mail like a hawk, even called the bank under the pretense of needing to update my info. What I found wasn't criminal. But it was a web of quiet betrayals. That account? It wasn't our only one. There were 2 more, and in one of them, get this, he had over $27,000 stashed away. I checked the deposit history. Every few weeks, small amounts. $400 here, $600 there. Sometimes even less. Just enough to stay under the radar. I felt like a fool. Worse, I felt betrayed. I wasn't angry about the money. I was angry about the lies. The secrecy. The fact that for years, I'd been budgeting groceries and saying no to weekend trips while he quietly squirreled money away for, what? A golf hobby? Or something else? That's when I started paying closer attention to his phone habits. He'd been guarded with his phone for months, but I chalked it up to work stress. Now, I noticed the sudden silencing of notifications when I walked into the room. The occasional smirk while texting. The nights he'd sleep facing the wall. One Friday night, while he was asleep, I did the thing I swore I'd never do. I went through his phone. I hate admitting that. I know it's a violation. But something in me snapped. And what I found made my stomach drop. There were texts. Not dozens, not hundreds, but enough. One contact stood out. I clicked. The messages weren't explicitly romantic, but they were intimate. Personal. Inside jokes. Photos from some rooftop bar I'd never been to. One message, sent 2 weeks ago, read, "Can't wait till next month. Finally. Just us. Just us? I sat there, clutching his phone like it was evidence in a murder trial. I didn't wake him. I didn't cry. I just stared at him. Sleeping peacefully. Trusting. His face softened in the dark, completely unaware that the woman next to him was cracking down the middle. I got out of bed and went to the kitchen. Burnt pasta still sat in the sink from earlier that week. I dumped it in the trash. And I made a decision. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to throw things or wake him up in the middle of the night. No. That would be too easy for him. He wanted secrets? I could play that game too. But better. The next morning was disgustingly normal. Mark made coffee. Black, like always. He whistled while feeding the dog. The same guy who, less than 10 hours ago, I caught whispering sweet nothings to someone named R. The man who had secret accounts, secret texts, secret plans. And he kissed me like he meant it. I smiled back. That was the moment I realized, pretending might be my new superpower. Now, here's the thing about me, I'm not some cold, calculating mastermind. I was shaking inside. I didn't sleep a wink that night. My mind raced with what-ifs. Was he leaving me? Was he cheating? Was I the last to know? Did my friends know? But outwardly, I was calm. Polished. The supportive wife. You okay? Mark asked that morning, glancing up from his phone, probably texting her again. I nodded. Yeah, just tired. He bought it. Because he was used to me being tired. Used to me being predictable. But not for long. The first step was figuring out who R was. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, even though my gut screamed affair. The messages weren't explicit, but they had that tone. You know the one, just enough plausible deniability to be innocent if caught, but personal enough to cross lines. There was no full name in the contact. Just R. But the photos helped. One was taken in a rooftop lounge with hanging lanterns and purple lighting. I reverse image searched the backdrop and narrowed it down to a trendy place downtown, the Lantern Room. Okay. That gave me a lead. I called in sick to work that day, first time in months, and spent my morning becoming someone I didn't recognize. I sat in front of our shared desktop, opened a new private email address, and subscribed to Mark's phone carrier notifications. The trick? I knew the answers to all his security questions. Childhood pet, first car, mother's maiden name. It's shocking how much damage you can do with the basics. Once I was in, I requested an itemized text log. Boom. Pages of numbers. One number popped up like clockwork, late at night, lunch hours, weekends. Same number as R. I ran it through a lookup site. It wasn't cheap. Cost me $19.95 and a wave of nausea. But it worked. Her name was Rachel West. I didn't recognize it at first. But when I checked Facebook, we had one mutual connection. My stomach twisted. She used to work with Mark. Same department, back when he was at that old job 2 years ago. I remembered her now, pretty, big laugh, kind of flirty in a not-so-subtle way. I'd met her once at a company mixer. She complimented my boots. I hated those boots. I didn't know what I expected to find. Maybe that she was single. Maybe that they had a secret love child in the suburbs. But what I didn't expect was that Rachel was engaged. Engaged. A shiny ring all over her profile, smiling selfies with a bearded guy who looked like he'd punch a wall if someone looked at her sideways. Trevor, apparently. So now I had questions on top of questions. Was she cheating too? Did Mark know she was engaged? Did Trevor? I spent that afternoon sitting on my living room floor, piecing together a version of reality that felt like a badly written soap opera. And I wasn't even sure who the villain was anymore. That night, Mark came home early. Client cancelled, he said, cracking open a beer. I watched him from across the room. I wondered what he'd do if he knew I had everything. The texts. The account numbers. Her name. The photos. The truth. But I didn't say a word. Not yet. Because now, this wasn't just about betrayal. It was about strategy. And survival. That weekend, I did something I wasn't proud of. I created a fake Instagram account. Yeah, I know. Petty. High school level. But I needed to get closer to Rachel without tipping my hand. I followed her. Liked a few of her engagement photos. Slid into her DMs under the name Claire. Said I was a wedding planner interested in collaborating on styled shoots and wanted to ask her a few questions about her recent engagement photo shoot for inspiration. Gross. I hated myself for being so manipulative. But she replied. And we talked. Turns out, she wasn't just engaged. She was 6 weeks pregnant. I stared at that message for a long, long time. I could barely breathe. And that's when it hit me. What if they can't wait till next month? Finally. Just us message. What if he wasn't planning to keep the lie? What if he was planning to leave? Me. For her. I didn't sleep that night either. I watched Mark snore softly beside me, completely unaware that the dam was crumbling. And as I lay there in the dark, one thought kept echoing in my brain, he thinks I don't know. But I do. And now? Now I have a choice. Blow it all up. Or burn it down, piece by piece. Okay. So now I knew. My husband was cheating. Not just emotionally, really cheating. With a woman who was engaged and pregnant. He had secret bank accounts. He was planning something for next month. And meanwhile, he was still coming home every night like we were just another suburban dream couple with a dog and a mortgage. I couldn't confront him yet. It would be like punching the glass before I saw the full painting. I needed more. I needed to understand what I was really dealing with before I decided how to destroy it. So I kept smiling. Kept playing my part. Which made what happened next even more disturbing. Our 8-year anniversary was a week after I found out everything. And he remembered. I half expected him to forget, honestly. I figured the guilt would make him distant, weird, maybe even try to avoid me altogether. But no. He went all in. Reservations at the same place he took me the night he proposed. Flowers, peonies, my favorite. Even got the dog groomed so he'd look extra handsome for mommy, like some kind of sitcom husband trying to rack up points. I stood in front of the mirror that night, curling my hair and staring at my own reflection like she was a stranger. There was something deeply surreal about dressing up for the man who was lying to me. He wore the blue shirt I'd bought him last Christmas. It still had a faint wine stain on the cuff from a clumsy toast. Funny the details you notice when your heart's breaking in slow motion. Dinner was beautiful. Too beautiful. He held my hand across the table. Told me how grateful he was to have me. Said he'd been thinking about the future. I wanted to laugh. Or scream. Or throw the damn breadsticks across the room. But instead, I asked, what kind of future? He didn't hesitate. Maybe we finally look into buying that lake house. You've always wanted a quiet place, right? Right. The lake house. The one I'd stopped mentioning 2 years ago when I realized we never had the money. I forced a smile. You've been saving? His eyes flickered. Just for a second. Yeah. I've been putting a little aside here and there. Oh, now he admits it. The same man who had never mentioned the extra accounts. The man whose salary was a mystery wrapped in vague commissions and fluctuating numbers. The man I'd caught lying to my face. I nodded. That's smart, I said, sipping my wine. Where? He blinked. Where what? Where are you saving it? There was a moment, tiny, almost imperceptible, where he paused just a second too long. Just, you know. A few places. We can go over it sometime. He looked down at his plate. Cut into his steak. Conversation moved on. But I saw it. That crack. And in that moment, I knew something else. He wasn't just lying. He was panicking. Later that night, back home, he made a move to get intimate. The old routine. Kisses along my neck. That low voice he used when he wanted something. And I let him. Not because I wanted to. But because I needed to know, was he trying to keep me close out of guilt, or out of fear? His touch felt robotic. Like he was going through motions, checking boxes. And when it was over, he fell asleep fast. Too fast. I lay there in the dark, my skin still buzzing, not from love or lust, but anger. He was a man living 2 lives. And in both of them, he was lying. The next day, I did something I never thought I'd do. I messaged Rachel. From my real account. No fake name. No wedding planner lie. Just me. Hey Rachel. I think we need to talk. Woman to woman. She didn't respond for 6 hours. But when she did, it was short. What's this about? I sent a screenshot. One of the texts from her and Mark. The one about just us. Her reply came in 60 seconds flat. Who are you? Why do you have these? Is this some kind of sick joke? Then I sent a picture of Mark. A recent one. The one I took at dinner, where he was laughing like he didn't have a care in the world. The typing bubble showed up, then vanished. Then again. Then nothing. 10 minutes passed. Then finally, I didn't know. And just like that, the walls cracked on her side too. We talked for an hour that night. She was devastated. She had known Mark from that job years ago, but they only reconnected a few months back. She said he told her we were basically separated. That we were figuring things out. That we lived together for now, for the dog. It was all lies. He'd even told her he was planning to move out next month. He had picked an apartment and everything. She'd helped him find it. The pieces fell into place. The second account? That's what he was using for the deposit. The third? For furnishing it. He wasn't planning to break it to me gently. He was planning to vanish. Just one day, gone. No messy fights, no divorce lawyers. Just a note, probably. Or worse, a text. Rachel was horrified. She didn't know he was still living as a real husband. She had no idea we were sharing a bed, a house, a life. And now? She was pregnant with his child. I ended the call shaking. Not because I was angry anymore. But because I realized how close I had been to losing everything overnight. To waking up one morning with nothing but a forwarded email saying, "I'm sorry, this isn't working." And suddenly, I wasn't thinking about confronting him. I was thinking about beating him. At his own game. Because if he was planning to disappear, I'd get there first. And make sure he had nothing left to come back to. I didn't cry the next day. That surprised me. I think it was because the grief had finally calcified into something sharper. Purpose, maybe. I didn't want revenge just for revenge's sake. I wanted clarity. I wanted control. I wanted to flip the script Mark thought he'd written and make him choke on the last line. So I made a list. It was actually on the back of a grocery receipt, which feels hilarious now. On one side, bread, toothpaste, olive oil. On the other, get proof, protect accounts, lawyer, exit plan, Rachel. Each bullet point was a mine waiting to be stepped on. And I was done tiptoeing. First, I got proof. Screenshots were one thing. But I needed more than that if I was going to talk to a lawyer or even consider taking him for what he was worth. So I bought a small digital voice recorder, one of those pen-shaped ones you see in spy movies, and started casually leaving it around. In the kitchen drawer while he made phone calls. On the shelf by the couch when he scrolled through his phone. One time I left it in his car before he left for lunch and prayed he didn't find it. He didn't. Most of what I got was boring. Sales calls, small talk, background TV. Until one night. I was upstairs reading while he took a call downstairs. I left the recorder under the dining table. When I listened back later that night, I heard this, "No, she doesn't know. I swear. I've got it all covered. Just a few more weeks. Just a few more weeks." I remember pausing the audio and staring at the wall. The man I slept beside every night was setting a timer on our life. But what chilled me wasn't the betrayal anymore. It was how casual he sounded. Like he was talking about picking up dry cleaning. That told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. Over. And over. And over again. Next, I got a lawyer. I didn't tell anyone, not even my sister, who I usually told everything. This wasn't the kind of thing you gossip about over iced lattes. It needed silence. Precision. Her name was Dana. Small office, no nonsense, sharp eyes that felt like they saw through you. I told her everything. She blinked once, then said, "You'll want to get ahead of this." We spent an hour going over every account, every asset, every thread I'd pulled from Mark's tangled web. She gave me homework: secure your credit, separate your income, open a new P.O. box, start a private financial record. Don't confront him until you've protected yourself, she warned. People like your husband? They rely on shock. If you're calm, you'll win. That line stuck with me. By the second week, I was ready to play my hand. But here's the twist, I didn't do it alone. Because Rachel? She wanted in. Not for me. Not even out of solidarity. For her baby. She didn't want to raise a child with a man who lied so easily. She didn't want Mark near her life if he was capable of doing this to someone else. And maybe, in a twisted way, it was a form of atonement. So we talked. A lot. She sent me texts. Call logs. Screenshots. Even a copy of the lease he'd signed for the new apartment. He was scheduled to move out in 3 weeks. He had lied to both of us about when. He told her he'd already left me. Told me nothing at all. Classic Mark. I joked once that we should meet for coffee. She said, how about something better? Which leads me to the most awkward dinner I've ever hosted. Yes. Dinner. It was my idea, actually. I invited Mark's boss, his best friend Jared, and my parents. A casual anniversary celebration I pitched as small and intimate. Mark didn't even flinch. He was still playing his part. Still smiling, still touching my lower back like he owned me. He even gave a stupid toast about riding out the storms of marriage. The wine was flowing. The dog was barking. Everyone was laughing. Until the doorbell rang. And Rachel walked in. She looked stunning, by the way. Pregnant glow and all. And calm. That calm where you know something's about to shatter. Mark froze. His smile faltered so slightly, I don't think anyone noticed but me. I said, sweet as sugar, oh, Mark. I believe you know Rachel? He opened his mouth. Closed it. Jared blinked between them. My mom set down her fork. His boss raised an eyebrow. Rachel walked up, smiled, and said, hi, honey. Sorry I'm late. Traffic was awful. Dead. Silence. I'll never forget the sound of Mark's glass hitting the table. Or the way my dad muttered Jesus Christ under his breath. Mark looked between us. What is this? I leaned forward. This, darling, is the storm you didn't think I'd ride out. And I smiled. Not because it was over. But because it was starting. They say when someone shows you who they really are, believe them. But when Mark's mask came off that night, what shocked me wasn't who he was, it was how fast he tried to rewrite the story. Like I hadn't been living in it the whole time. Let me back up. After Rachel dropped her little intro bomb, hi, honey, the room practically vibrated with tension. My mom looked like she'd just swallowed a lemon whole. Jared opened and closed his mouth like a confused fish. Mark's boss, Tom, blinked at Mark with that unreadable corporate stare. You know the one, processing the PR damage in real time. And Mark? He laughed. A weak, stuttering kind of laugh that didn't match the room. Then he looked at me. What the hell is this? I didn't answer. Because Rachel beat me to it. Oh, Mark didn't tell you, she said, turning to the table with a breezy tone that was absolutely terrifying. We've been seeing each other for months. He told me he and OP were separated. Living together for the dog, right? My mom gasped. Like, actual movie gasp. And then came the kicker. I'm pregnant, she said. Complete silence. Except for Mark, who said, this is insane. Then to Rachel, why are you doing this? Then to me, you set this up? What the hell is wrong with you? And there it was. No apology. No explanation. Just deflection. Classic. Mark. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't flip the table, even though I think everyone half expected me to. I calmly reached under the table and pulled out a manila envelope. It had copies of the bank statements, the screenshots, the text logs Rachel had sent me, the lease for the new apartment, everything. I slid it across the table to Mark's boss. I thought you should see who's representing your company, I said. Tom opened the folder, flipped through 2 pages, and said, I'm going to need a drink. Mark stood up so fast he knocked his chair over. This is private, he barked. I tilted my head. You brought your private into my life. And now I'm handing it back. He turned to Rachel. You're really doing this? Here? She folded her arms. You made me a part of this without my consent. You lied to both of us. I'm not protecting you anymore. His eyes flicked around the room, realizing, maybe for the first time, that there was no saving this. And then he did something I hadn't seen coming. He stormed out. Just like that. No speech, no guilt trip. Grabbed his jacket and left. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. The rest of the night was awkward, surreal, and full of whispered apologies that weren't really mine to give. My mom cried quietly. My dad said he'd never liked that boy. Jared sat stunned, like the last 8 years of our marriage had just collapsed in front of him and he'd missed all the warning signs. Maybe he had. Mark's boss stayed just long enough to say, if he doesn't call me by 9 a.m., he's done. Rachel didn't say much after. We hugged once at the door, an awkward, lingering thing that meant we survived him, but we'd never speak again. When everyone was gone, I sat at the dining table, wine glass in hand, staring at the empty seat across from me. 8 years. Gone in 8 minutes. But here's the part no one tells you about devastation. It doesn't feel like fire. It feels like quiet. The next day, Mark didn't come home. He didn't call. Didn't text. Just silence. I wasn't sure where he was, and I didn't care. I knew the apartment wasn't ready yet. I knew Rachel wouldn't take him in. I imagined him in a motel somewhere, cursing me, rewriting the story in his head again, how I had ruined his life. But I didn't care. Because now I was free to clean up. I followed Dana's instructions to the letter. I closed the joint accounts. Froze the cards. Transferred everything tied to my name out of his reach. I filed for divorce. And because I had proof of financial dishonesty, emotional abuse, and potential abandonment, Dana said we had a strong case. Especially if we file first, she said. Which we did. 2 days after the dinner. It felt sterile. Not empowering. Not dramatic. Just paperwork. But necessary. 3 days later, he finally called. It was 1:14 a.m. I remember because I was halfway through folding laundry and watching reruns. The phone lit up. Mark, asshole, yeah, I'd renamed him. Petty, I know. I let it ring twice. Then picked up. He sounded exhausted. Hollow. Why would you do that to me? No hello. No remorse. I didn't answer right away. So he kept going. You humiliated me. In front of my boss. My friends. You ruined everything. I said, quietly, you ruined it when you started lying to me. A beat. I didn't mean for it to go this far. And that line? That broke something in me. Because that's what they all say. When they get caught. When the lies start to catch fire and there's no one left to blame. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Like they tripped and fell into betrayal. Like it wasn't 1,000 little choices that led them here. I didn't even yell. I just said, you don't get to rewrite this. Not this time. And hung up. He showed up 3 days later with flowers and bags under his eyes, talking about working through it and making things right. I didn't even open the door. I just slipped the envelope through the crack, a copy of the divorce papers, and said, you're not the man I married. You're just the man I survived. By week 2 of radio silence, something strange happened. I started breathing differently. It's a weird thing to describe. But for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for a shoe to drop. I wasn't calculating how to phrase things so I didn't set off Mark's passive-aggressive jabs. I wasn't monitoring his moods or explaining why no, I didn't buy the organic eggs this week because they're twice the price, Mark. It was like silence could finally mean peace. Not tension. Not dread. Not the kind of quiet that came before another lie. Just actual, earned quiet. But the mess wasn't over. See, people like Mark don't go down easy. Especially when they feel like they've lost control. He was still texting, though the frequency had slowed. A long, dramatic we could have had everything on a Tuesday. A bitter you'll regret this on Friday. A voice message Sunday night where he actually cried. I didn't respond. Because while he was spiraling, I was finally seeing clearly. And then I found the lockbox. It was hidden in the back of our bedroom closet, tucked under an old box of cords we'd been meaning to sort since 2019. I wouldn't have even looked there if the dog hadn't knocked over a laundry basket and sent everything tumbling. Inside the lockbox? Old documents. Tax stuff. Some pay stubs from before we were married. But also a little black notebook. At first, I thought it was a journal. Mark never struck me as the Dear Diary type, but hey, maybe he was more introspective than I gave him credit for. He wasn't. The notebook was a ledger. Not of business expenses. Of women. Dates. Places. Names. Some had stars next to them. One entry literally said reliable if things blow up my name. I read that line 3 times. Reliable. Like I was a bomb and she was a backup generator. There were 8 names in total. Some from years ago. A few I vaguely remembered, just friends from his gym or someone who worked in another department. Rachel wasn't even the last one. I took the notebook to Dana. She leafed through it with the same look doctors give when they've already seen the x-ray and just need to confirm the patient knows they're sick. This changes the tone, she said flatly. We can present a pattern of behavior. It helps support your emotional distress claim. Not to mention the financial deception. I nodded. But honestly? I didn't care about the case anymore. I cared that I'd shared a bed with this man. Trusted him with my body. My home. My dreams. And all along, he'd been drawing up backup plans like I was a stock losing value. I'd wanted to burn his world down. Now? I just wanted to walk away while it was still on fire. A week later, he showed up again. I was taking out the trash, wearing leggings and a hoodie with pizza sauce on the sleeve. Real glamorous stuff. His car pulled up, slow. He got out. Holding a single rose. I almost laughed. He looked rough. Not just tired, shaken. Unshaven. Hair a mess. Wearing that leather jacket he thought made him look edgy in college. He walked up to me, cautiously. Like I was the one with a record of betrayal. Can we talk? He asked, eyes darting around like I might slam the bin lid on his head. I didn't answer. Just stared. I've been thinking, he started, holding the rose like it was proof of effort. I messed up. I know that. But we can come back from this. We've been through worse, right? I let that sit for a second. Worse than this? I asked, softly. His lips twitched. Okay, maybe not this. But, people survive affairs. They go to therapy. They rebuild. I looked down at the rose. Then at his hands clean, but with a band-aid on his thumb. Rachel's name flared in my head like a neon sign. I said, how's the baby? His face froze. I don't know if she's keeping it, he said. She won't talk to me. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, so you're the victim now. His jaw clenched. I'm just saying it's complicated. No, Mark, I said, stepping closer. It's not complicated. You cheated. You lied. You used me. You played house while building a second life. And now that it's collapsing, you want the safest piece left standing. He looked down. For a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered the notebook. The reliable note. The golf charges while I skipped haircuts to stretch our budget. And I smiled. Goodbye, Mark. I turned around. Walked back inside. And locked the door. That was the last time I saw him. He signed the papers 2 weeks later, through his lawyer. No more texts. No more begging. I think, deep down, he realized I'd seen the real him, and I wasn't going to unsee it. The apartment lease? Cancelled. Rachel? I don't know. I blocked her. Not out of hate, out of survival. Some fires don't need fuel. What I do know is this, sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't exposure, or courtroom drama, or destroying someone publicly. It's rebuilding privately. In silence. Where the only person you answer to is yourself. Freedom is weird. Nobody tells you that. When you finally cut the cord, when the last paper is signed, the last insult left unread, the last piece of furniture you both touched is shoved out of the house, you think you'll feel this grand, cinematic relief. Cue the music, right? What you get instead is a kind of echo. A weird, buzzing emptiness in the places he used to fill. His toothbrush wasn't there. His smell was gone from the pillows. The sound of the garage door no longer triggered a Pavlovian mix of anxiety and fake smiling reflexes. And then there was the guest room. I moved into the guest room before the papers were even finalized. It was stupid, maybe. Symbolic. But I couldn't sleep in our bed anymore. The mattress felt too big. The memory's too loud. I started calling it his room in my head, even though it was technically still mine. So I took my laptop, my clothes, a small lamp I loved, and made the guest room mine. Put fairy lights on the wall. Changed the sheets to ones he'd always hated. Bought a candle that smelled like fresh eucalyptus instead of his musky, overpriced cologne. It was a tiny rebellion. And it helped. For a while. One night, maybe 3 weeks after the divorce went through, I heard something in that room. It was around 1:30 a.m. I'd been reading, actual reading, not doom-scrolling or Reddit spiraling, and suddenly, thud. Soft, but distinct. Like something falling off the dresser. I froze. Every instinct screamed Mark. Which was ridiculous. I'd changed the locks. Installed a camera. Blocked every number he had. Still, I walked down the hall in the dark, phone flashlight in hand. The door was open a crack. Inside? Empty. Except one of his ties. On the floor. Just lying there. Perfectly coiled like it had been set down on purpose. I hadn't seen that tie in weeks. Probably hadn't even touched it since I cleared out his half of the closet. And yet, here it was. In the guest room. Was it possible I'd missed it during cleanup? Maybe it got caught in a drawer and fell? Maybe the dog had dragged it in? But it didn't feel like that. It felt intentional. Like a haunting. Not by him, he was too self-absorbed to linger. But by the version of me that once tied that tie for him before work. The version that ironed it while humming, not knowing he was texting our between meetings. I left it on the floor. I didn't need to pick it up to throw it away. I'd already thrown him out. The next morning, I woke up to an unexpected email. Subject, follow-up from Tom, Mark's boss. I hesitated before opening it. My first thought was he's suing me for defamation. My second was he wants a character reference to fire Mark properly. But it was neither. Hi, name, I wanted to reach out to say thank you. That dinner, well, it was a lot. But it was honest. I don't get a lot of honest moments in this job. Mark's been let go. His behavior was enough to raise red flags beyond personal boundaries, and he violated our ethics code in a few places. I also wanted to ask something strange. Would you be interested in freelance consulting? Our HR department is a mess. And after seeing how you handled everything, with composure, clarity, I think we could really use someone like you. No pressure. Just think about it. Tom, I stared at the screen. Me? The woman who'd spent the last 3 months unraveling her marriage like a crime scene? But something in me stirred. Maybe it was vindication. Or maybe it was just the tiniest flicker of what comes next. I replied, let's set up a call. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mark's downfall opened a door I didn't even know I wanted. A door he never would have let me walk through when we were married. He'd always downplayed my work. Said things like, you don't want the stress of management, or consulting is unstable. What he meant was, stay predictable so I can be unpredictable. But now? Now I was building something. Piece by piece. Not a business yet. Not a legacy. But a me that wasn't shaped around someone else's lies. A week later, I finally cleaned out his room. Not because I missed him. But because I was reclaiming space. Physical and emotional. I boxed up what was left, the ties, razors, old cologne, a couple books that still smelled like him, and drove it to a donation center. I told the clerk they were from an ex-husband. He didn't even blink. On the way home, I passed the building where Mark used to work. A place I'd driven by 100 times. This time, I didn't look away. And I didn't flinch. That night, I slept in our old room again. Clean sheets. No ghosts. No trace of him. Only eucalyptus and quiet. And for the first time in months, I dreamed not about betrayal or revenge, but about beginning. By the time April rolled around, I had what I called structured peace. My mornings had a rhythm: walk the dog, coffee, answer emails. I'd started consulting part-time for Tom's company, which felt like poetic justice every time I logged in. I even painted my bathroom this soft green I'd always liked, but Mark once said made the space look sick. Screw him. The walls were glowing. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living in a home, not a hostage situation with throw pillows. But peace is fragile. And mine shattered with a single ping. It was a Wednesday. I was curled up on the couch, halfway through a documentary, when my phone lit up with a message I wasn't supposed to see. From Rachel. Except, it wasn't to me. It was a group text. Apparently, her phone had synced to the wrong thread, or maybe she was just flustered and typed the wrong name. Either way, the message popped up on my screen before I could process it. He's trying to come back. Says he didn't choose either of us, but that he misses the baby. What the hell do I even say to that? My breath hitched. I hadn't heard from her since the night of the dinner. We'd both mutually agreed to go our separate ways. Too much emotional wreckage between us, too little trust. But now? Now he was crawling back to her. Even after everything. Even after pretending she didn't exist when he tried to guilt me into starting over. I didn't respond. I could have said something snarky, something about snakes and second chances, but I didn't want to give him space in my mouth anymore. He didn't deserve it. Still, the message stirred something I wasn't ready for. Rage, yes. But also, confusion. Because if he was saying he didn't choose either of us, then what the hell was that flower stunt? The crying voice message? The tie, mysteriously found on my floor? It didn't add up. Unless he hadn't really let go of me. That night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I logged into the cloud account we used to share. Mark never revoked my access, probably because he didn't remember it existed. It was how we used to back up photos and documents. He always claimed he hated cloud stuff and rarely checked it. I hadn't looked since everything exploded. Now I did. And what I found made my stomach turn. There was a folder titled Taxes 2021, but inside were photos. Screenshots. Of texts. Texts I had sent him over the years. Anniversary notes. Little check-ins. One where I asked him if he was okay during a rough work week. Another where I said I was proud of him, even though he didn't get the promotion he wanted. And beneath each image, he'd written a caption. Like it was a journal. This was the day I almost told her. Couldn't do it. She was so kind this week. I didn't deserve it. I think about leaving every day. But then she says something like this. Each entry was a breadcrumb of guilt. Tiny moments he documented, not to remember me fondly, but to justify staying. I sat in the dark, nauseated. It wasn't love. It was leverage. Emotional collateral for the man who wanted to be the good guy, even while he was lying to both of us. I exited the folder. Backed out to the main screen. And then I saw the last update. March 28th, video uploaded. I clicked. It was grainy. Phone quality. Taken from a dashboard camera. Mark. In a car. Talking to someone. I turned up the volume. No, I'm not going back to her. She's too smart. She'll never let it go. Rachel's still emotional, but she'll calm down. I just need a little time. Let it cool off. I'll figure it out. The camera cut off mid-sentence. I watched it twice. Then again. Too smart. Not angry. Not bitter. Not unstable. Too smart. That was the reason he wouldn't come back. And somehow, that stung more than anything else. Because in the end, he didn't leave because he loved her more. He left because he couldn't manipulate me anymore. The next morning, I changed the locks again. No real reason. Just wanted the finality of it. I donated the last things he left behind, the mug he always used, the hoodie I used to sleep in. I sold the couch we picked together and bought a second-hand one that didn't hold memories in its cushions. And then, for the first time, I wrote it all down. Not for him. Not for court. Not even for Reddit. But for me. So I could stop holding it like glass in my chest. So I could look at every cut, every bruise, and say, you survived this. Sometimes I still see his car model in traffic and my stomach flips. Sometimes I smell cologne in a store and instinctively check if he's nearby. Trauma doesn't obey logic. It lingers. Echoes. But it doesn't own me. Not anymore. It was a Tuesday, one of those gray, unremarkable ones that feel like background noise in the middle of your life. I had taken my laptop to this little cafe a few blocks from home, tiny tables, overpriced lattes, decent Wi-Fi. A cozy bubble where I could work without thinking too hard about how the walls in my house used to echo with lies. I was halfway through revising a company policy draft for Tom's team when I heard someone say my name. Not the cheery barista tone. Not a familiar voice from a friend. But tentative. Uncertain. Like they weren't sure if I'd even turn around. I did. And I froze. It was Jared. Mark's best friend. The best man at our wedding. We hadn't spoken since the night of the dinner explosion. Back then, he looked like someone had slammed a brick through the window of his worldview. Now? He looked tired. A little thinner. Hair more salt than pepper around the edges. "Can I sit?" he asked, gesturing toward the empty chair across from me. I paused, then nodded. He sat down like someone approaching a ticking bomb. "I wasn't going to bother you," he started, but I didn't know who else to talk to. That made me laugh, dry and low. "Jared, I'm not exactly Mark's PR team anymore." "I know," he said quickly. "This isn't about him." "Not really." Which was, of course, a lie. Turns out, Jared had spoken to Mark recently. Apparently, after the job loss, the public implosion, the failed rebound with Rachel, Mark had gone quiet for a while. Then, suddenly, he resurfaced, wanting to reconnect with old friends, pitching some startup idea, pretending the past 6 months were a bad dream that could be rebranded with enough spin and tequila. Jared didn't buy it. But what shook him, what brought him to my table, was what Mark had said. "Mark told me," Jared said, looking down at his coffee, "that you were the reason his life collapsed. Not the cheating. Not the lies. You." I waited. I'd heard this before. The classic narcissist rewrite. But then Jared added something else. He said, and I quote, "She was never the victim. She just knew how to play one better than anyone else." That did something to me. Because I hadn't seen Mark in months. Hadn't spoken to him. Hadn't answered his last message. And still, he was out there spinning, twisting, erasing. Trying to unwrite me. I let out a breath and said, "So why tell me this, Jared? You siding with him?" "No," he said quickly. "I'm telling you because I believed him. For a long time. Even when the cheating came out, even when Rachel walked in, I still thought you must have pushed him away somehow." He shook his head, like trying to physically dislodge the guilt. But after the dust settled, I started remembering stuff. Conversations. The way he'd talk about you when you weren't around. The little lies I ignored. He looked up at me then, and his eyes were glassy. "I didn't protect you. I should've. I thought I was being loyal to my friend. But I wasn't. I was enabling him. And I'm sorry." Silence. Real, heavy silence. I didn't cry. I didn't hug him. But I nodded. Because even if it came late, there's something strangely sacred about the truth, especially when it shows up in the voice of someone who once helped hide the lie. Before he left, Jared handed me a small envelope. "I found this in a box he left at my place a while back." I don't think he meant to leave it behind. After he walked out, I sat there for a minute, staring at it. No name on the front. Just sealed. I opened it. Inside was a photo. Of me and Mark. Taken at some dumb street fair years ago. I was laughing, holding a funnel cake. He was looking at me, not the camera. There was a note scribbled on the back. "The last time I felt like I deserved her." No signature. No apology. Just a sentence. And for the first time in a long time, I felt nothing. Not pain. Not nostalgia. Just done. That night, I lit a candle, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat in the room that used to be ours. The picture sat on the counter. I looked at it one last time. Then I ripped it clean down the middle. One half went in the trash. The other in the shredder. Balance. It's strange how some endings arrive not with a bang, but a whisper. No fireworks. No final monologue. Just one morning, you wake up, pour your coffee, and realize you're no longer waiting for the next aftershock. That's what healing felt like. Not instant forgiveness. Not forgetting. But the absence of dread. The quiet reintroduction of hope. 6 months post-divorce, I stood at the window in my kitchen, sipping coffee, and caught my own reflection in the glass. I almost didn't recognize her. She had softer eyes, stronger shoulders. The exhaustion had faded from her skin. She stood taller, not because she was trying to prove anything to anyone, but because she didn't need to shrink anymore. She wasn't just surviving. She was home. I hadn't heard from Mark since Jared's cafe visit. The texts finally stopped. The emails. Even the voice messages that had slowly morphed from guilt-ridden sobs to defensive rants to eerie silence. He was gone. And the weirdest part? I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt done. I'd spent so long building a life around him, protecting his secrets, managing his moods, shrinking my needs to make room for his chaos, that now, with him out of the frame, the entire canvas was blank again. Terrifying. And exhilarating. I took a solo trip to Asheville. Rented a cabin with creaky floors and no Wi-Fi. I hiked in silence, wrote in a journal I didn't plan to share, and cried one night without really knowing why. I think it was the first time I let myself grieve without an audience. Not just for Mark, but for the version of me that thought love meant endurance. That believed sticking it out was always noble. That confused being needed with being loved. When I came back, I started repainting the guest room. Not because it was symbolic. Not for some Instagrammable fresh start. Just because I wanted a reading nook. A place for me. I picked a dusky rose color. He would have hated it. That made me smile. One morning, while on a Zoom call with Tom's team, I got a message from HR. A new client wanted to onboard me full-time. Said they'd heard about how I handled a very public and difficult situation with professionalism and strength. I asked who referred me. The name came back, Rachel. I didn't reply. Didn't call. Didn't reopen that door. But for the first time, I didn't feel haunted by her. We had both made it out of the wreckage. That was enough. I started dating again. Carefully. Casually. No expectations. I told myself I'd know when I was ready for something real, not when someone said the right thing, but when I stopped bracing for betrayal in every silence. It took time. But eventually, I went on a date and didn't compare his laugh to Mark's. Didn't flinch when he left his phone face down. Didn't lie awake, wondering if I was being fooled again. He wasn't perfect. But neither was I. And that was finally okay. A few weeks ago, I ran into Jared again. Grocery store. He looked better. Lighter. Said he was dating someone new. We made small talk in front of the deli, and then he said something I think about often. You seem good. Not just okay. Really good. I smiled. Not performatively. Not for anyone's benefit. Just genuinely. And I said, yeah. I am. The window in my kitchen now has plants on the sill. Ivy, basil, a tiny succulent I named Recovery. The view hasn't changed. Same sidewalk. Same old oak tree across the street. But every time I look out, I feel like the world is a little wider than it used to be. Because I'm no longer standing behind glass, waiting for someone to notice I'm breaking. I walked through the fire. Came out the other side. And built something stronger from the ash. Epilogue, to the woman reading this who feels the floor cracking beneath her, who's holding a secret or a suspicion or a heartbreak too big to name, I don't have all the answers. But I'll say this, you're not crazy. You're not dramatic. You're not too much or too broken or too late. You are just waking up. And when you do, you'll be amazed at how light it feels to stop carrying what was never yours. And just like that, our story reaches its conclusion. If you've stayed with us till the end, why not support us by subscribing? It truly makes a difference. I've handpicked 2 more videos that I believe you'll love. Go ahead and check them out. I'll be right here, ready to share another story with you soon. Until next time.